Welcome to Echoes of the Past. I'm Anthony Nguyen.
And I'm Jacob Van Riper. Today we're launching our new series, Love, Lies, and Empire. We're breaking down history's most toxic relationships.
When we talk about toxic relationships, we usually mean people, but today we're looking at a relationship between two nations that lasted for nearly 200 years.
Britain and India. It's a story that started with a simple swipe right for trade and turned into one of the most controlling, gaslighting, and exploitative power dynamics in human history.
In this episode, we'll evaluate how British imperialism from 1750 to 1900 fundamentally transformed India's political, economic, and social structures.
And we'll show how Britain acted like that partner who claims they're helping you reach your potential while they're actually just emptying your bank account.
To understand how this started, we have to look at the 1800s. Europe was going through a massive growth spurt called the Industrial Revolution.
Exactly. Factories in Manchester and London were hungry. They needed raw materials, specifically cotton, to keep the machines humming. And once they made those goods, they needed a massive market to sell them to.
At the same time, the world was a giant leaderboard. European empires were in a dead heat. Power wasn't just about how happy your citizens were, it was about how much of the map you could paint your color.
And Britain had the ultimate cheat codes: new technology, steamships that could ignore the wind, railroads that could pierce through jungles, and the Maxim gun, one of the first machine guns.
So, imperialism wasn't just a random choice, it was a calculated move driven by economic desperation, intense global competition, and a massive technological advantage. India, with its vast resources and huge population, was the ultimate prize.
So let's look at the pickup lines Britain used. Why did they want India so badly?
Economically, it was a gold mine. We're talking tea, spices, opium, and white gold, cotton. Britain wanted to take these resources at a low cost, ship them back home, and manufacture them into expensive products.
Politically, India was the jewel in the crown. If you controlled India, you controlled the Indian Ocean. You were the big man on the global stage.
But they couldn't just say, "We're here for your money." They needed a moral excuse. This is where the civilizing mission comes in. They used social Darwinism, the pseudo-scientific idea that Europeans were naturally superior, to justify their rule.
It's the ultimate gaslighting move. They told India, "You're too chaotic to rule yourselves. You're lucky we're here to show you how to be civilized." My dear India, look at you. You're so disorganized. I'm not taking advantage of you. I'm helping you become better. You need me to show you how the modern world works. Don't struggle. This is for your own good. Now, the way Britain moved in was sneaky. It wasn't the British government at first. It was a corporation.
Right, the British East India Company. Think of it like Amazon having its own private army and the power to tax entire countries. They started with trading posts, then began playing local Indian princes against each other.
They used the doctrine of lapse, which basically said if an Indian ruler didn't have a male heir, Britain just took the land. It was a corporate hostile takeover.
But the mask slipped in 1857. After the Sepoy Rebellion, a massive uprising by Indian soldiers, the British government realized the company couldn't handle the relationship anymore.
So the British Crown took direct control. This period is known as the British Raj. No more corporate middleman. Now it was direct, state-sponsored control over every law, every tax, and every life in India. But don't think for a second that India was a passive victim. The partner fought back.
The Sepoy Rebellion was the biggest explosion. It was sparked when Indian soldiers realized the British had zero respect for their religious beliefs, but it was about more than that. It was years of built-up rage over unfair taxes and lost sovereignty.
And resistance looked different for everyone. Some fought on battlefields. Others, like the early Indian National Congress, tried to use the British legal system against them.
Some people had to collaborate just to survive. If you were a local landlord, maybe you worked with the British to keep your status. It was a complicated, high-stakes game of survival.
You say you're helping me, but you're controlling everything I do. You don't listen. You only hear what you want to hear while you pick my pockets.
Let's talk about the bank account. How did this relationship change India's economy?
Before the British arrived, India was a manufacturing powerhouse. Their hand-woven textiles were the best in the world.
But Britain couldn't have that. They needed India to be a consumer. not a competitor. So they slapped massive taxes on Indian cloth and flooded India with cheap machine-made British fabric.
They essentially deindustrialized India. They forced farmers to grow cash crops like indigo and cotton for export instead of food.
This had devastating consequences. When the weather turned bad, there was no food stored up because the land was being used for British profit. This led to horrific famines that killed millions.
It's the definition of a toxic partner. Britain controlled all the money, leaving India with no independence and barely enough to survive. We actually have receipts. Let's look at a primary source from Lord Macaulay, a British official in 1835. He was the guy in charge of India's education system.
I have never found one among them who could deny that a single shelf of a good European library was worth the whole native literature of India and Arabia.
Wow, read that again. He's saying centuries of Indian history, philosophy, and poetry aren't worth a single shelf of English books.
This wasn't just about trade. This was cultural domination. By erasing Indian culture in schools, they tried to make Indians feel inferior, so they would accept British rule as natural. And Stein Serin Nutsar Duboi Dons Andream. On the other side, we have Dadabhai Naoroji. He was the first Indian elected to the British Parliament, and he famously described the drain theory. Einstein Samaila.
The face of the British rule is the face of the benefactor, but the reality is that India is being bled. The wealth is drained to England.
Naoroji was pointing out the math. Britain was taking tax money from Indians and using it to pay for British wars and British salaries.
He used the word bled. It wasn't a partnership, it was a transfusion where only one side was getting the blood. It created a cycle of economic dependency that lasted for generations. Now, if you ask a British historian from the time, they'd point to the gifts they gave India: the railroads, the telegraph, the legal system.
And, it's true, by 1900, India had the largest rail network in Asia. But we have to ask, who were those trains for?
Exactly. They weren't built so Indian families could go on vacation. They were built to move British troops quickly, to crush rebellions, and to move raw materials to the ports faster.
So, let's evaluate. From 1750 to 1900, did imperialism transform India? Absolutely.
Politically, India lost its sovereignty to a foreign crown. Economically, it went from a global producer to a dependent consumer. Socially, its traditions were belittled by a civilizing mission.
It's the ultimate tragedy of this relationship. Britain claimed to be the adult in the room, but they built their own wealth on the foundation of India's struggle. That's our time for today. Thanks for joining us on Echoes of the Past.
We hope this episode of Love, Lies, and Empire gave you a new perspective on the history of the British Raj.
Remember, history isn't just dates and battles. It's the story of how power works and how people resist it.
Because as history teaches us, not all relationships are healthy.
See you next time.